The silence inside the dirt-floored arena was nearly complete. Overhead, harsh white lights hung from the industrial ceiling, casting a sharp glow on the center ring, where the sound of aluminum wheelchair wheels cut across the sand like a quiet whisper. The young man in the chair looked no older than 20. His face still held traces of youth, but his eyes, large, brown, and wide, carried a weight far beyond his years. His dark denim jeans contrasted with the faded button-down shirt he wore, the kind you'd see on someone who'd grown up around barbed wire fences and the smell of hay. When he stopped at the center of the arena, the crowd seemed to hold its breath. His name was Beau, and this was the most important moment of his life. From the far end, behind a heavy wooden gate, the sound of hooves echoed. A strong, dark bay horse was being led toward the entrance of the arena. The lights hit his sleek coat, revealing powerful muscles and alert, intelligent eyes. He was a pure quarter horse, the kind bred from generations of champions. The horse, like Beau, seemed to carry a story that no one else knew. And when their eyes met, something unexplainable happened. Time seemed to freeze, as if the world itself had paused to witness what came next. His name, whispered days before by an old trainer, was Whisper, and nothing could have suited him better. The auctioneer, an older man with a silver beard and a voice built on decades of experience, held the microphone in his hand, but he hesitated. He had seen hundreds of riders, breeders, and buyers walk into that arena. But never in over 30 years, had he seen a young man in a wheelchair request to enter the ring with a high-value horse. There was no arrogance in the boy's face, only calm determination, and a deep sadness. The auctioneer pressed his lips together, gave a slow nod, and lowered the microphone. The silence remained. Beau extended his hand. No rope, no whistle, no commands. Just a steady gesture, like he was reaching out to an old friend. Whisper saw him and hesitated for just a moment. His ears twitched, his gaze locked. Then, as if responding to a voice only the two of them could hear, the horse took one step forward. Some people in the bleachers began whispering to each other. Others just watched, frozen in place. Whisper moved slowly toward Beau. There was no fear in his gait, no resistance. There was recognition, intimacy, as if the boy and the horse shared something older than time itself, perhaps a pain, perhaps a silence. Beau kept his hand extended, his eyes locked on the animal. When Whisper finally reached him and lowered his head gently against the boy's shoulder, the old auctioneer brought his hand to his mouth, overwhelmed. He looked out at the crowd, now quietly wiping tears. In that instant, no one had any doubt. Something extraordinary had just taken place. For a long moment, no one moved. Whisper stood completely still, his forehead pressed gently to Beau's shoulder, as if he were listening to something only the boy could say. Then, slowly, Beau raised his other hand and let it rest on the horse's mane. The texture was familiar. Too familiar. It wasn't just the softness beneath his fingers, it was the weight of the past it carried. His eyes didn't blink. They stared past the crowd, past the arena, lost somewhere in a memory that had returned too fast, too strong. Just a year ago, Beau wasn't in a wheelchair. He had been training on his family's ranch in northern Texas, riding every morning before dawn, breaking colts with his father's firm voice echoing in his ears. Horses were more than animals to Beau. They were his language, his comfort. His late mother used to say he had a heart that spoke in hooves. And no horse had ever understood him the way Whisper did. Back then, Whisper had been a timid colt, passed over by most buyers for being too quiet, too distant. But Beau had seen something else. A sadness in the colt's eyes that mirrored his own. What the public didn't know, what no one here could have guessed, was that Beau had once belonged to this very same horse. Whisper wasn't a stranger. He was family. They had grown together. Whisper was the first horse Beau had ever trained from the ground up. And Beau had been the first human Whisper had ever trusted. But all of that changed with the accident. A bronco training session gone wrong, a misstep, a loud snap, and then darkness. Beau woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed, unable to move his legs. The doctors said it was a miracle he'd survived. But for Beau, survival had felt like punishment. After the accident, everything changed. His father stopped speaking much. The ranch fell quiet. And Whisper, without Beau, refused to let anyone near him. He'd been sold off quietly to a breeder, too wild to handle. Beau hadn't seen him since. Until now. Until this moment, where fate, silence, and a cold metal wheelchair brought them face to face again in front of 100 strangers. Beau's fingers tightened slightly in Whisper's mane. His jaw trembled. The auctioneer, watching from the sidelines, felt something shift deep in his chest. This wasn't just a reunion. It was a collision of broken pieces finally finding their way back together. He turned away, blinking fast, and cleared his throat into the microphone. "Lot 22, he announced, voice cracking. Quarter horse gelding, dark bay, 10 years old. Bidding starts at 8,000. But no one raised a paddle. No one spoke. All eyes were on Beau and Whisper, two souls wounded in different ways, standing together like time had folded in on itself. And in that pause, before the first bid, something inside Beau shifted. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he might be whole again. The silence in the arena began to crack under the weight of discomfort. Murmurs rose like a slow tide. People weren't sure what they were witnessing, a miracle or a disruption. A few leaned forward, waiting for someone to place a bid. Others whispered to their neighbors, their eyes darting between Beau and Whisper. The auctioneer hesitated, holding his gavel, unsure whether to repeat the starting price. But Beau didn't notice. His hand was still on Whisper's neck, and Whisper hadn't moved an inch. Behind the scenes, in the shadows near the loading gate, a man in a tan blazer stood with arms crossed and jaw clenched. Dean Halpern, owner of a large equine investment group, had been eyeing Whisper for weeks. He had plans for the gelding, plans that involved breeding, training, and resale. Beau's presence in the arena, and Whisper's shocking reaction, had disrupted all of that. Dean narrowed his eyes. "Who the hell is that kid?" he muttered. "And why does that horse know him?" The auctioneer, sensing tension, cleared his throat. "Do I hear 8,000? His voice echoed off the arena walls. A paddle went up in the back row. Dean had made the first bid. Another bidder, a woman from Oklahoma in a white hat, raised her hand. 9,000, she called out. The auctioneer acknowledged her. Then Dean again. 10. Back and forth it went, the price rising, but the emotion in the room tightening like a rope being pulled from both ends. Beau watched, silently. Every number felt like a countdown to losing something irreplaceable. Beau had no money. Not enough for this. He'd come not to buy, but to see, to make sure Whisper was okay, maybe to say goodbye if no one stopped him. He'd never imagined Whisper would recognize him, much less walk straight to him in front of 100 people. But now that he had, the thought of them being separated again twisted something deep in his chest. Whisper shifted slightly, as if sensing Beau's pain, and nuzzled the side of his arm. The gesture was small, but in that moment it felt like the loudest scream in the world. Someone in the audience spoke up. Should he even be in the ring? The voice came from the left side, sharp, skeptical, accusatory. He's not a registered bidder. A few others murmured in agreement. Dean smiled faintly, his arms still crossed. Rules are rules, he said under his breath, loud enough for the people around him to hear. Beau felt the air shift. The moment of peace between him and Whisper was being threatened, not by violence, but by bureaucracy. The auctioneer looked over at Beau. His hand hovered near the gavel, unsure. This wasn't just about a horse anymore. It was about something deeper, loyalty, history, maybe even redemption. and as the price reached $12,000, Beau looked up at the man on the platform and said, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, "Can I say something?" The auctioneer froze mid-motion, his hand still hovering above the gavel. For a moment, he didn't respond. Auctions weren't meant for speeches, and time was money in this world. But something about Beau's voice, quiet, low, almost trembling, had the power to cut through the dust, through the rules, through the noise in people's heads. The auctioneer looked at the crowd, then back at Beau. "Say it," he said gently. "You've got 1 minute." Beau took a shaky breath and turned toward the stands. "That horse's name is Whisper," he began, his voice soft but steady. "And he wasn't always like this. Skittish. Distant. I trained him when he was just a colt. I was 16. He was wild, scared of his own shadow. Wouldn't let anyone near him." He paused, swallowing the lump rising in his throat. "But I saw something in him. Something familiar. Like he was waiting for someone to understand him." Beau's eyes drifted to Whisper, who hadn't moved since he started speaking, just stood there beside the wheelchair, loyal and still. A hush fell over the arena. Even Dean Halpern narrowed his eyes. The woman from Oklahoma lowered her bidding paddle. The auctioneer didn't dare interrupt. Beau continued, "I lost everything after my accident. Couldn't ride. Couldn't train. My family nearly lost the ranch trying to keep up with medical bills. Whisper was sold off without me knowing." He looked down at his legs, then back up at the crowd. "I wasn't supposed to be here tonight. But something told me I had to come. I didn't think he'd remember me." His voice cracked on the last word. Whisper stepped closer to Beau, nuzzling his arm again, as if on cue. It wasn't just affection, it was recognition. The kind that can't be trained, bought, or sold. Some in the crowd gasped softly. Others blinked away sudden emotion. A man in the third row removed his hat and lowered his head, a silent show of respect. The auction hall had seen thousands of horses over the years, but no one had ever seen a moment quite like this. Dean stepped forward then, interrupting the silence. "That's all real sweet, kid," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "But this is a business. Sentimental stories don't pay $12,000. He turned to the auctioneer. "Let's finish the bidding." His tone was final, cold, calculated. He wasn't moved, or maybe he just didn't want to be. Beau's hands gripped the wheels of his chair. His jaw clenched. "Then maybe I'm not here to buy him," he said, voice suddenly sharp. "Maybe I'm here to ask what he's really worth. To any of you." He turned back to the crowd, eyes fierce now. "Because if Whisper walks out of here with someone who sees him as nothing more than a number, then everything we had, everything we lost, meant nothing." The arena fell into silence again. But this time, it wasn't from confusion. It was from shame. No one spoke. The entire arena was frozen, caught between two worlds, the world of numbers and contracts, and the world of memory, loyalty, and loss. Beau's words echoed through the stands like a quiet thunder. His voice wasn't loud, but it had landed like a hammer in the hearts of those watching. The auctioneer looked down at the list of buyers, then back at the boy in the chair. Whisper remained motionless, eyes soft, his body calm beside Beau, a living testament to everything that had just been said. Then, slowly, something began to shift. A woman in her 60s, seated near the front row, raised her hand. "I withdraw my bid," she said, her voice trembling. She looked at Beau, then at Whisper. "That horse already knows who he belongs to." Murmurs rippled through the bleachers. One by one, 3 more bidders followed. Paddles were lowered, eyes turned down. Even those who had come only to buy felt the weight of what they were witnessing. Whisper wasn't just a horse anymore. He had become a symbol of something they had all lost or longed for. But not Dean Halpern. His face tightened. His pride was now on the line. He raised his paddle deliberately, making a loud rustling sound. 13,000, he barked. The auctioneer flinched slightly but nodded. 13,000, we have 13, he announced. His voice was quieter now, more cautious. Beau's eyes locked on Dean's. For a split second, something unspoken passed between them, not just a disagreement, but an understanding. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about dominance. Beau leaned forward in his chair. You can buy him, he said softly, but he'll never run for you. He won't follow your voice. He won't trust you. You can own him on paper, but you'll never earn him in spirit. The truth in his words hit harder than any accusation. Dean's face twitched, but he said nothing. His silence spoke more than he realized. The audience had turned. The air itself seemed to lean toward Beau. Suddenly, from the opposite end of the arena, a man stood up, tall, older, wearing a faded denim jacket and a hat worn by time and wind. It was Beau's father, Russell. No one had seen him arrive. His presence brought a wave of silence even heavier than before. His eyes were tired, lined with years of regret. Let him speak his price, Russell said, his voice gravelly but clear. If he's man enough to try and buy that horse, he should be man enough to look my son in the eye while he does it. Dean didn't move. But the moment had turned. Whatever advantage he'd held was gone. The crowd was no longer watching an auction. They were watching a reckoning. And for the first time since Beau had entered that arena, he wasn't standing alone. Beau's hands tightened on the arms of his wheelchair. Hearing his father's voice felt like being hit by a wave he wasn't ready for. Russell hadn't said more than a few words to him since the accident. They had shared a house for months, but not a real conversation. Silence had become their language. So for Russell to speak now, to speak for him, sent a strange burning ache straight to the center of Beau's chest. Dean still didn't respond. He looked from Beau to Russell, calculating. He could feel the crowd turning against him. The buyers, the spectators, even the auctioneer, they were all leaning away now. Not just physically, but emotionally. He knew the deal was slipping, but pride held him in place. Fine, he said. I'll withdraw my bid. Let the cripple keep his horse. The word snapped through the air like a whip. Whisper's ears twitched sharply. Beau's face stayed still, but his eyes darkened. Russell took one slow step forward, placing himself between Dean and Beau. You ever talk about my boy like that again, he said, voice like gravel and steel, and I swear to God, I don't care how many lawyers you've got, you'll leave here with nothing but shame. His hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from restraint. The crowd watched in absolute silence, hearts pounding. Dean looked away, muttered something under his breath, and walked toward the exit without another word. The moment he was gone, it was like a pressure valve had released in the room. The auctioneer stepped down from his podium and approached Beau directly. Son, he said quietly, I've been doing this a long time. I've seen horses sold for $1 million, and not one of them was worth what I saw in this ring today. He reached out and put a hand on Whisper's neck. This one's yours. No paperwork needed. He looked at Russell and nodded. Paid in full. Beau blinked, lips parting but no sound coming out. Whisper moved closer again, resting his head lightly against Beau's chest. The warmth of the animal's breath hit his neck. The boy closed his eyes. After all the pain, all the loss, all the quiet, this was the first time something felt whole. He raised a hand and placed it gently on Whisper's muzzle, grounding himself in the moment. Behind him, Russell stood still, hands in his pockets, staring not at the horse, but at his son. And then, quietly, Russell said, You think we can start over? His voice was low, hesitant, like a man not used to asking for anything. Beau turned slightly, his voice barely audible. "I don't know," he said. "But maybe Whisper can show us how." The crowd didn't applaud. They didn't cheer. They just stood, hands by their sides, deeply moved by what they'd witnessed. Because some reunions don't need noise, just the silence of two hearts finally beating in rhythm again. The old Ford pickup rattled along the gravel road as the sun dipped below the Texas horizon, painting the sky in dusty pinks and deep orange. Beau sat in the passenger seat, his chair folded in the back, Whisper in the trailer behind them. No one spoke during the ride home, not because there was nothing to say, but because neither of them knew how to start. Russell's hands gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing anchoring him to the present. Beau stared out the window, watching familiar fences blur past, fences he hadn't seen since the accident. When they pulled into the ranch, everything looked smaller, older. The barn's paint was chipped, and weeds had crept up through cracks in the concrete. But there was something comforting in the decay. This place had survived storms, droughts, and grief. Maybe they could survive too. Russell parked the truck beside the stable and turned off the engine. "You sure you want him in the old paddock?" he asked, not looking at Beau. "He was never easy back there." Beau nodded. "He'll remember it." He opened the door, hoisted himself into the chair with practiced strength, and rolled toward the trailer. Russell followed in silence. When they opened the ramp, Whisper stepped out slowly, ears alert but calm. He paused at the scent of the air, like he was testing it, and then looked at Beau. No hesitation, no fear, just quiet recognition. Together, they moved toward the paddock as if they'd never been apart. Inside the barn, the dust danced in the sunlight like ghosts. Beau ran his fingers along the wooden stall gates, feeling each nick, each memory. "This is where we started," he said. Russell stood at the entrance, arms crossed. "Yeah," he replied, his voice softer than usual. "And it's where I stopped." The words hit hard, not because they were loud, but because they were honest. Russell looked down. "I didn't know how to handle it, seeing you like that. I thought staying quiet was better than saying the wrong thing." Beau didn't respond right away. Instead, he turned toward Whisper, who had already settled into the stall like he belonged there. "You left me alone with silence," Beau said finally. "And it was louder than anything you could have said." Russell winced. He didn't deny it. He just nodded. "I was wrong." The barn felt heavy with words that had waited too long to be spoken. Later, Beau wheeled himself outside and sat near the fence, watching the sun sink fully behind the trees. Whisper stood in the paddock, tail flicking gently, head raised toward the wind. Russell came and stood beside his son. For a long moment, they said nothing. Then, softly, Russell asked, "You think he remembers everything?" Beau smiled, tired but sure. "I think he remembers more than we do." And somewhere in that answer, a door opened, not to the past, but to the possibility of healing. The next morning arrived wrapped in silence and golden light. The ranch was still, the kind of stillness that holds both peace and anticipation. Beau was already awake, seated in the barn with a cup of coffee resting on the edge of his chair. He'd barely slept. His thoughts had tangled with dreams of galloping fields and the sharp snap of reins between his fingers. But more than anything, he kept seeing the look in Whisper's eyes, that unwavering trust that told him, without words, "You can try." Russell entered the barn, a weathered mounting block in his arms. He set it down beside Whisper's stall without saying a word. Beau raised an eyebrow. "You think I'm ready?" he asked. Russell didn't smile, didn't nod. He just said, "I think you have to find out." For all the distance they'd carried over the past year, this simple gesture said more than an apology ever could. Beau stared at the block for a long moment, the wooden steps worn from years of boots, but never wheels. Beau wheeled closer and parked beside the block. His hands trembled slightly as he positioned it, angling his body. Whisper stood calmly in the open stall, watching him. Not with pity, but with patience. Beau reached up, gripping the saddle horn Russell had strapped on earlier. His muscles strained. He paused, took a breath, then tried again. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't fast. But inch by inch, sweat on his brow, he pulled himself onto Whisper's back. For a split second, the world went quiet. No birds, no wind. Just the sound of breath, his and Whisper's, rising together like two halves of the same soul. Russell stood frozen. The image before him was almost too much. His son, broken but defiant, sitting atop the same horse that once taught him courage. Beau wobbled slightly but regained balance. His hands found the reins. His legs didn't move, but his heart did. "I don't know what I'm doing," Beau whispered to the wind. Russell stepped forward. "You never did," he said, chuckling softly. "You just trusted him." Whisper shifted, taking a slow step forward. Beau didn't flinch. He adjusted, learning the rhythm again. The barn doors opened in front of them like a curtain rising, sunlight flooding the space. Beau rode forward, not fast, not proud, but free. Every hoofbeat was a declaration that something lost had been reclaimed. As they moved into the light, Russell wiped his face with his sleeve. Not tears, he would say later, just dust. But deep down, both men knew. This wasn't about a boy riding again. It was about what the ride meant. And though Beau couldn't feel his legs, in that moment, he had never felt more alive. 3 days after the ride, an envelope arrived. It was thick, official-looking, with a seal from the National Equestrian Rehabilitation Association. Russell found it in the mailbox and handed it to Beau without a word. Beau opened it slowly, unfolding the letter with cautious fingers. As he read, his brows furrowed, then lifted. "They saw the video," he said quietly. Russell tilted his head. "What video?" Beau handed him the second page, a printed email. Someone in the auction crowd had recorded the moment he mounted Whisper and posted it online. Over 200,000 views. And counting. The letter was an invitation. No, a proposal. Whisper had been selected for a national program that paired horses with veterans and individuals recovering from trauma. The catch? He'd need to be sent away for a year, trained and evaluated under the program's supervision. Whisper could help dozens, maybe hundreds, but it would mean separation. Again. Beau stared at the words, heart torn in two. Whisper wasn't just a horse. He was a lifeline. The thought of letting him go a second time felt like tearing open a barely healed wound. Russell sat down across from his son at the kitchen table, the letter between them. "You brought him back," he said. "Maybe now it's his turn to bring others back." Beau didn't respond right away. He looked out the window, where Whisper stood under the old oak tree, his coat shining in the evening light. "I'm not sure I can let go," Beau finally admitted. "Not again." Russell nodded. "I know. But maybe letting go isn't losing. Maybe it's leading." For the first time in a long while, Beau didn't argue. That night, Beau went to the paddock alone. Whisper approached, quiet as always. Beau held the halter in one hand and rested his other on the horse's cheek. "They want you," he said softly. "People who need you. The way I did." Whisper blinked slowly, leaning into his touch. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," Beau added. Whisper snorted, as if answering him. As if saying, "You already are." Back inside, Beau sat at the kitchen table with a pen and paper. The contract needed a signature. His name. That was all. He hovered over the page, the pen trembling slightly. Then, slowly, Beau signed. Not just a name, but a decision. A sacrifice. Russell watched from the doorway, proud but silent. He knew that kind of strength. The kind that chooses what's right over what's easy. As Beau folded the papers and sealed the envelope, a strange peace came over him. Pain didn't leave, but it softened. What they had shared, what they had rebuilt, was real. And now, Whisper's journey wasn't ending. It was just beginning, without him. The morning Whisper was scheduled to leave, the ranch was covered in a thin fog, the kind that made everything feel quieter, softer. Beau was already outside, bundled in a jacket, waiting beside the paddock. Russell stood a few feet behind him, hands in his pockets, saying nothing. There was nothing left to say, really. This moment wasn't about words. It was about presence. About witnessing something painful and letting it happen anyway. The trailer pulled up slowly, its tires crunching over gravel. The driver stepped out, respectful, quiet, like he knew the weight of the animal he'd been sent to collect. Whisper stood calm as ever, head lifted, eyes locked on Beau. He didn't resist when the halter was fastened. Didn't rear or snort or fight. Because he understood, maybe more than anyone, that this wasn't abandonment. It was trust. Trust that their bond wouldn't disappear with distance. Beau rolled forward and reached up, placing one last hand on Whisper's neck. "Go help them," he said softly. "The way you helped me." Whisper lowered his head until it touched Beau's shoulder, pressing into him like he had in the auction ring. The pressure was warm, steady, a goodbye, yes, but not an ending. A beginning for both of them. Beau held on just a second longer, then let go. Whisper walked into the trailer with calm steps, never once looking back. As the trailer disappeared down the road, the silence returned. But this time, it wasn't hollow. It was peaceful. Russell approached and sat on the fence beside Beau. For a long moment, they just watched the horizon. Then, Russell broke the quiet. "Your mom would have been proud." Beau nodded slowly, blinking away the sting in his eyes. "I think she'd be proud of both of us." For the first time in a long time, there was no tension between them, only shared memory and the beginning of something new. Weeks passed. Then months. Letters started arriving from the center. Pictures of Whisper with veterans, children, trauma survivors. In every photo, his eyes looked the same. Calm, steady, healing. Beau printed them out and pinned them to the wall of the barn, right above the old saddle rack. The ranch began to change too, slowly but surely. Russell fixed the broken fence. Beau started coaching young riders from his chair, sharing not just techniques, but resilience. One evening, as Beau wheeled himself out to the paddock under a sky painted in gold, he looked toward the gate and smiled. Whisper wasn't there, but his presence was. In every hoofprint in the dirt, in every breath of wind that passed through the trees. Whisper had left, but he had also stayed. And as Beau sat beneath the stars, he knew this with absolute certainty. Some goodbyes don't end stories. They begin them.